Then after that, with the young people, I began to try to feed people on the streets and do this block party movement, just let it grow. And I found a group called the Black Panthers who would help me out, while people in the churches were kind of afraid to get out there. The Black Panthers weren't. So here's what I found out, that we should be co-belligerents. Anybody, they can have a different viewpoint that's trying to do something good and willing to do it with you, and they can be Black Panthers or Christians or whatever group they belong to, or just a good-hearted atheist. But if they want to feed people, then let's do it together. And I began to discover that plurality is good if there's true tolerance, and if we really care about loving people and giving them what we have. And so I began a process of growth, enough that by 73, a friend of mine, the very one who helped pay for those 600 young people to come there, a fellow named Arthur DeMoss, he brought to my house, it was about 1976, a black man who'd been all over the world, pretty famous. He wrote a book. He shouldn't be known as a Black Panther now, but as an author and teacher and a minister of reconciliation. And he told this man, you hang with Bill Iverson because y'all are going to be great friends. Well, in the history of our lives, that didn't happen right then. It took about 20 years, maybe Mr. Eldridge Cleaver will tell about that. But if I had to tell you what the meaning of my life is, having told you about that, because I love adventure and risk and doing things that are dangerous, I've always liked that. But I think my word might be a very simple word, encouragement. It seems to me the best thing I can do in my life is to encourage other people, significant people, because you can't encourage everybody, but to find a few people and encourage them to be better than they are. And in other words, if I ask you, is the world getting better or worse, and you say, well, it looks like it's getting worse, I say, but what if everybody was like you? Would it get better or worse? And if you can say it'll get better, what that means is you're beginning where you are and you're making your part of the world a better world. And in that, just think of the centers of influence. Every one of you relates to 5 or 6 or 8 people significantly, and many, many more people in a particular and good way at work or school or so on. But probably a circle of 25 people. And if you just took 25 people and multiplied that about 25 times, you'd have the population of the earth. That's what geometric progression is. So you don't have to have a big program to change the world, make it a better place. If you want to encourage people, love people, and you'll risk and you'll lay down your life like the Black Panthers did. They had a wonderful platform. They had just one thing that wasn't good, and it wasn't good just because of the situation, and that got them in trouble. But they had very good goals. They are idealists. They wanted their world to be a better place. And I'd like to encourage you to think about your life. What is the meaning of your life as you hear my friend Eldridge Cleaver? And if you don't know what that is, I'd start looking. And I don't think you should be satisfied till you find the meaning of your life. Why are you here? So, Eldridge, my friend, why are you here? Yeah. Why are you here? Come on, tell us.
Good evening, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. So you people are really long suffering. And I thank those of you who have heard me talk already. I thank you for coming back. This has been one of the most fulfilling experiences that I've had in my speaking career, which covers many years. Coming here to Missoula is very significant to me. The experience that I've had in the high schools and all of the different venues that we participate in has made it even more important. The last time I came here, I took home with me 300 pounds of rocks from somebody told me it was a Flathead River. I make flower pots out of rocks and cement, and I bought a big old gunny sack bag with me. I'm gonna take some more rocks, you know? Because I find that there's some beautiful rocks in Missoula. You got some very handsome men. You got some very beautiful ladies. So being a rock hound, eyes satisfied, eyes happy, eyes here. And I guess I don't have to really tell you my story because Bill did that. No, I just like to pull his toe once in a while, you know, because he's older than I am, you know. And I like to remind him of that now and then, you know. Because that's how I get back at him sometimes. He takes shots at me. And he's really been a blessing to me. I've learned a lot from him. I really do enjoy living in the same house with him, studying with him, and coming to strange places with him. And I find that the people with whom I've been working here, like Bob and Professor here, Ed, that's right, ain't it? Yeah, that's right. It's really been one of, they went beyond themselves and organized this program, and I think that it's quite challenging to do what they've done, and I'm glad they weren't timid about it, but they reached high, and they put something together very good. So tonight, I guess it'll be the longest talk I've given here. It won't be the last one, but I'm hoping that through this talk, you will get to understand me, know who I am. Because I know that there are a lot of people that say, man, that's a weird dude. He's going around here talking like about, this is what people used to say about me. They said, man, you went away, man. You was a revolutionary. You come back here talking about Jesus Christ and patriotic. They said, man, that sounds crazy. And I know that a lot of people who are not used to people changing dramatically in their life, they find it hard to think that you are not up to something or that somebody didn't pay you, you know. Well, I don't work for the government, and I'm not out to sell you a bill of goods. I'm happy to be here in Montana because Montana has been so significant in the history of the United States. It is so fundamental that I can't think of a better place that I would like to be in order to launch my own personal ministry of reconciliation, because all of the biggest problems that have confronted the United States of America had a great birth and expansion and growth here in Montana, because this is the place where our destiny was basically decided. This is the place where Custer had his last stand. This is the place where, at the same time that Custer was having his last stand, that the Native Americans, it was also their last stand. Even though they defeated Custer at the Little Bighorn, it brought about a big reaction from the Union that caused a lot of decimation to them. And so I think that when we look at our country, the foundation and its roots, we have to look at Montana and what has happened here. So I think that based on that history, this is a wonderful place to start talking about reconciliation, because my job is to look up under the rug and to pull out all of the problems that we've hid under the rug and put them on the table. And the reason that I'm glad to do this in Montana, because I'm asking that we be able to gather around that table when we put all the problems on that table, and that when we gather around that table, we look across the table at each other and we see a brother, we see a sister, we see another child of God. We don't see an enemy, we don't see a statistic, we don't see a problem, because we have got to enlarge our identity. And I think that a person with my background is well situated to speak about reconciliation, because I was a stone rebel. I was a person who, I came from a very good, solid family. Both my grandfather were preachers. One of them was a Methodist preacher, my mother's father, and my father's father was a Baptist preacher. Now that's a real unstable mix, you know. You talk about something that's destined to explode, that stuff there is dynamite. But even though they came from that diverse religious background, I grew up in a Christian home, and they were after me because I was the third child, but I was the first boy. So I wasn't even out of the womb well before they got after me trying to make me a preacher, you know. But they couldn't agree on which seminary I should go to, you know. So one of them wanted me to go to this one of them wanted me to go to this one. And I think I was influenced a lot by my own father, because he didn't like preachers at all. My father, I never have understood what went down between him and his father to cause alienation. But my father used to play the piano in his father's church. And at a certain point, he left the church. He started playing the piano in nightclubs. And my father didn't even know how to say preacher. He always said a chicken-eating preacher, you know. My father was down on preachers, boy, but I didn't understand, but I absorbed some of that. And later on, as I grew up, I was very negative, not only about preaching, but just about religion as a whole, you know, because I began to think about religion as being part of a big problem. And I was a good student, you know, because whenever I would read the chapter, I'd get an A in the test, you know. And but it was when I didn't read the chapter that I got a C or a D. And I know you know what I'm talking about, you students here. And that's why I encourage people to take the time to read the chapter, man. It ain't that hard. It don't take that long. You ain't got that much more to do. And because what you're doing is laying a foundation for the rest of your life. And so I try to be positive when I come out and speak to people, because I have a lot of negative press that precedes me sometimes. And so I try to make up for that. But some of that stuff you can't make up for, you know. But what I am happy about is that the press doesn't know the worst things that I've ever done. And the police don't know the worst things I've ever done. And that's why I'm not going into any detail about the worst things I've ever done, because, you know, these statute of limitations and things, you got to be careful, you know. Because they'll come and get you and take you back and put you on trial and lock you up. Boy, look here. And it is because of those things that I didn't get caught for that weighed heavily on my heart. And so I want to just ask you to think over the overall picture of what we're talking about. My story starts in 1935. That's when I was born, back in Little Rock, Arkansas. And things were quiet in those days. There was a war going on, and the Second World War was starting. People were fighting all over the world. And the movement for black people's rights in America was just really, it was all taking place in the courts. It wasn't nothing going on in the streets. The NAACP was filing petitions and stuff, but it was kind of quiet. It was not something that was in your face every day. And I'd like to really ask you to think about history, because the world had gone through some stages that started when the Europeans went out of Europe into the rest of the world and colonized Africa, Asia, what became Latin America. That's when they came over here to the North American continent and ripped off this land from the people who lived here. And first of all, they came over here and discovered these people. I guess these people didn't know it, but they was lost, you know. And Columbus and them came over here and say, hey, I discovered you. Come to the club, and you couldn't discover nothing because you was lost. You the one who was lost. You talking about you going to India, you end up in America. Then you came over here and told these people, hey, you Indians. Well, these people, they had different names and identities, and so that is what happened. And then he came over to Africa and said, hey, we got a job for y'all. And kidnapped us and brought us over here and put us to work. And some people say, hey, you black people ought to be glad that you got brought over here because we taught you how to read, taught you English, you know, and you never would have been over here if we hadn't done that. Now, wouldn't that have been a tragedy? You know? And so it happened, and the whole world experienced a big change. And we here went through some real serious stuff. And it started off hundreds of years ago. They say the first slaves were brought over here in 1619. Some people dispute that and push it back farther. But it doesn't really matter exactly what the date was, because as we came down through those centuries, you know, suddenly we wake up and run around. Martin Luther King is running around talking about, I had a dream. And so people say, man, is that when the civil rights movement started? Was Martin Luther King had a dream? And he woke up and told the world about it, and that's the civil rights movement? I'm sorry, but that's not the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement started when this country started. Because this country started as part of the whole movement and struggle for people in the world for freedom. And people left Europe to get away from oppressive governments and oppressive religions, and we're taught in school that people came over here seeking religious freedom and all kind of really good little stories we're taught. And so what I like to point out is the context in which all this was taking place, because I cannot talk about my life in isolation to what was going on in America and the world, because it's a context that makes you who you are and what you are and what you became. And this whole drama that is dear to my heart, it started when those men said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator, not by the government, by their Creator, with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we in this day, we like to nitpick about what these guys said, what they was up to. I know women get mad because they didn't say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women were created equal, you know? They left women out. They didn't even mention them, see? And then the black dudes get mad because they say, hey, some of those dudes that signed that document, they were the biggest hypocrites in the history of the world, because they talking about they hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and yet some of them had people in chains in their backyard. They had slaves. Some of them were slave owners. Yeah, you can say that. But what I like to do is point out the larger picture. Because these men, if they were nothing else, they were masters of words. And what they said was very important. And what they did was very important because they did not limit the words that they put forward. They put forward a universal principle, and it was higher than the level of their own behavior. This is important because unlike a lot of people today, they wrote that principle up high. Like today, if you got some politicians that write some principles, they write them down low so that they don't look bad in the light of those principles, you see. Because these people be running around here today talking about they are leaders. They're the biggest liars in the history of the world, boy. We've developed a political culture of lying, mendacity. But those people in those days, they were trying to reach for the truth. They were trying to set something out there that would help fulfill the dreams that the people had who came here of a better world. And so I give them credit for writing those words up high and for not writing them down low. Because when you talk about when did the struggle begin, that's when the struggle began. Because from that point on, they struggled with each other because the struggle was to bring our behavior in line with those high principles. And it started between those men who signed that document, and it led to the battlefield of war because the argument was finally settled during the Civil War at great cost. A whole lot of people got killed in the Civil War, both North and South, black and white. A whole lot of people got killed, and it was those principles working. Those principles were put forward at a time when there was not one single country on the face of the planet Earth that was democratic. Those principles went to work. And today, you cannot find one single country on the face of the planet Earth that does not claim to be democratic or trying to be democratic, even though a lot of them be lying. And sometimes when we talk about it, we be lying. But look at this world. Even the Union of South Africa, which was like the most extreme example of the problem, even South Africa is trying to be democratic now. So this is the result of the principles that those men established when they wrote those words. And those principles have not only transformed the world, they've transformed the United States of America. And 100 years after the Civil War, in 1966, the Civil War ended about 1865. In 1966, so 101 years later, the Black Panther Party was founded in Oakland, California. So look at what came between the Black Panther Party and the end of the Civil War. We had a whole atrocious history of Reconstruction and the struggle for black rights in the South. I'll tell you, if you would ask somebody to write a scenario for the worst kind of problem you could possibly think of, I cannot think of a better scenario than what took place here in the United States after the Civil War. Here you had the people who were the aristocracy of the South, who were in control, who thought they were better than even the white people in the North, defeated on the battlefield, stripped of their wealth, stripped of their political power, not allowed to participate in politics, and then to see their former property, their slaves, invested with political power. Some of them made congressmen and governors and all this stuff. And then to be put there on the same land mass with them. I can't think of a better prescription for confusion and trouble. And that is what we came from. And we had to deal with that. More people got killed. People got lynched. It was a horrible experience that we went through. And it went on for 100 years. And it was when, in 1954, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision mandating the desegregation of the school system, that the walls of segregation began to tumble down in 1954 after all of those years of pain, suffering, and death. And it was not like Martin Luther King started his movement in 1956. It was 10 more years when the Black Panther Party started in 1966. And so I got sent to prison the same day that the United States Supreme Court issued that decision, mandating desegregation. They sent me to the penitentiary. I was 18 years old, and I had gotten caught with some marijuana. They locked me up. They gave me from nothing to 6 years. I mean, that's how long I could stay, with 6 years. And I had been going to school. I was on my way to becoming a lawyer and an economist. That's what was in my scenario. But next thing I knew, I needed a lawyer. And I was uptight. And so before the Supreme Court issued that decision, things were quiet in civil rights land. It was all taking place in courts and all that. But after the Supreme Court issued that decision, a change came in America, because for the first time, the people in the community knew for sure that the law was on their side. Prior to that, the people who wanted segregation, they had the law on their side. They were the law. And it was when that decision was issued that things began to change. And 2 years after the Supreme Court spoke, that's when Martin Luther King started that bus boycott. And even though he was a nonviolent man, there's a whole lot of violence started coming down. These people going down there doing sit-ins and walk-ins and trying to integrate lunch counters and all that. And the whole country exploded. And we began to see on a daily basis newspaper reports, television reports about people trying to integrate and do this and that. And they were getting beat up. We saw the police beating up people. We saw the National Guard beating up people. We saw the white citizens councils beating up people. And it was a process that was provocative and that stirred your blood and made you start trying to understand what was going on. And that's when I began to really study the history of this country, to try to understand what this was all about and how I fitted into it. Because my life, I was going to be a tenor saxophone player and a lawyer and an economist, and I was going to get rich and live happily ever after. But it didn't turn out that way. And so when I was in prison watching all of this stuff going down, I started studying different philosophies. And my mother tells me that up until I was 12 years old, I was a little angel. She said, boy, you were just the sweetest little son a woman could want. And she said, but when you turned 12, you became a little devil. That's when I started getting into trouble and doing things that were a problem, you know. And it was very heartbreaking, because my mother was my best friend. I really loved my mother. And it was really after I got out of jail that everything started to fall apart. See, I was on my way to being 20 years old, but when I was 14 years old, my home exploded. My father started fighting my mother. My father was big as I am now. He used to hit my mother. And that stuff went on for several years. And the point came when I couldn't take it anymore. And so one night, like they'd had a fight the night before. And it looked like my father was getting ready to start another fight that night. And I told my father, I said, Daddy, you can't ever hit my mother again. And he said, who's going to stop me? I said, I'm going to stop you. He said, you in what army? I said, I don't need no army, Daddy. You can't hit my mother again. Now people look at me today and they see I'm fierce against domestic violence. Because when I see a man hitting a woman, I see my father hitting my mother, and I won't go for it. A lot of people say, well, it ain't none of your business. She ain't your wife. Yes, it's my business. She's my sister. And I'm not going to stand by and let that happen. And it is my business. And I will butt in. And I'll make a citizen's arrest on you, and I'll use whatever force is necessary to bring you down. Because if it's anything I hate, is to see a man beating on a woman. Because I saw my father beating on my mother. And that devastated my heart. It destroyed our family. And I remember that last night. And my father wasn't going to be stopped. And he started inching over there towards my mother. I got between him and my mother. And I knew how he would do it. He would try to, brush past me and hit her. And so I was playing football in those days, and I was doing gang fighting and stuff, and I knew how to deal with people, And certainly he came. He tried to get past me, and he hit me. Hit me here, and it still hurts when I think about it. But I stood my ground, and I hit him in his chest. And I knocked all the air out of him. And he had to sit down and catch his breath. And he tried to make another move, but he wasn't anxious to get hit like that again, because I was thumping. And I'm telling you, in my heart, I had decided that he couldn't hit my mother, and I would have done anything that I had to do, including kill him, to stop him. That's how mad I was about the way that he would hit my mother. So that marked my character. I mean, I didn't end up hating my father. I fell out with him and all that, and later on we reconciled and we got to be all right. But this was really a long time later. But I know what it does to children when the children has to see the father hitting their mother. It breaks their heart. It tears them apart. And it warps them into the future. And that is why we must be concerned about that. We must put an end to that. That's one of the problems that we've got to put an end to, because there's too much going down the tubes as a result of it. And so I went to jail, got out of jail, watching all this civil rights stuff. I got influenced by Malcolm X. I liked Malcolm X. Martin Luther King, I couldn't deal with Martin Luther King because he's talking about this turn the other cheek and all this stuff. I said, man, I want to turn the other cheek and get hit in the other jaw. I didn't want that, see. I remember once we went and had a meeting with Martin Luther King and argued with him about that stuff. And we wanted him to say something positive about the militants in the movement. And we wanted him to take a position against the war in Vietnam. And we talked to him. There was 13 of us, and we argued with him for a couple hours one Saturday night. And Martin Luther King said, you can't tell me what to do. There's a whole lot of people running around here trying to tell me what to do. There's people with much more power than you got going to try to tell me what to do. And ain't nobody going to tell me what to do except God. And I began to really respect Martin Luther King because he talks behind closed doors the way he talked in public. A whole lot of people ain't like that. I've talked to presidents behind closed doors. I've talked to senators and congressmen, mayors and sheriffs and chiefs of police. And I'm telling you, behind closed doors, they talk turkey to you. They say, Eldridge, we're on the same side. I'm working on the inside, and you're working on the outside, but we all working for the same thing. And here's my card with my secret number on it. If you ever have a problem that you can't deal with, give me a call. But Martin Luther King said, you guys, what you're doing is wrong. And if you have your way, we'll have a Holocaust. And he said, we have to go a different way. And one of the guys with us kind of threatened him and told him, man, you're a misleader. We need to get rid of you. And he told him, he said, I'm not scared of you. I'm not afraid of you. You're not going to hurt me. And he said, and if you do, I don't care. I don't mind dying for what I stand for. He said, if you don't have something that you're willing to die for, then you don't have anything that's worth living for. And I have to say that he was right. And we told him, well, Dr. King, this man is out of order. We don't want to threaten you, and he's out of order. We'll talk to him later. We didn't come here to threaten you. We came here to try to communicate with you, to let you know how a lot of people out there are feeling about what you're doing. So he wouldn't deal with it. He wouldn't back up on anything. So we thought, okay, we'll let it go tonight. And he was going to preach the next day at a black church there in Tennessee. And so we went that next morning to hear him preach. We sat in the front row. I was sitting about right there. And Martin Luther King, he got up there and started justifying his movement and telling people why he was doing what he was doing. He was talking about how suffering is redemptive, that even though a lot of people are getting hurt, some people are getting killed, in the long run, it's going to pay off in dividends and freedom for our people. He said, because it's not all white people who are doing this stuff. And those people who know better, their conscience is going to work on them, and they're going to have to stop those other white people who are doing this stuff, and the day will come when that will stop. And maybe it will be costly and be painful for us, but in the long run, it will pay off in freedom for our people. And then he said, if there's going to be any blood, let it be our blood. I jumped straight up. I said, man, you are totally insane, man. I said, if we're going to integrate anything, let's integrate this blood. Let's integrate the cemeteries. Talk about let it be our blood. He repeated what he said. And he said, what you're talking about, it would just increase the killing. What we want to do is to put an end to the killing. We don't want to contribute to the killing. So that we have to go this way. And you know, the time came when I began to agree with Dr. King that it is better to be peaceful, even to the point of self-sacrifice, than to create a Holocaust. And it was 2 days after Martin Luther King got assassinated that I got in a gunfight with the Oakland Police Department. And that is why I had to leave the country to avoid going to the penitentiary. Because as a member of the Black Panther Party, I stood with the group of people who said we're going to stand up and fight because our people have been getting killed for 400 years. It's time to put an end to it. And particularly this violence is taking place by the police who are supposed to enforce the law, going around beating our people and killing our people. As men, we have got to stand up and stop it. And I agreed with that. And so I went out into the streets. I got in gunfights with the police. I never killed the police, but I shot some. They shot me. They killed a lot of my comrades. But I don't want to try to hide it. Some people make this speech, they say, oh, I never shot nobody, you know, and that's a lie. Because I reached the point where I don't like to lie no more. I like to tell it like it is. Because I know that the truth is what will set us free, and we need the truth. Because we have too many lies going on. And so as a result of that gunfight, I had to run away. I went first to Canada, then I went to Cuba, then I went to Algeria. I stayed in Canada just a few weeks until the St. Lawrence waterway unfroze enough to where the boats could go out, and I left Canada on a Cuban boat, and I arrived in Havana, Cuba, Christmas morning of 1968, about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I stayed there for 9 months. And I know that I stayed there for 9 months, because when I left San Francisco, I left behind a little thin wife. And when I got to Algeria, some friends told me that your wife is up in room 32 up here. And so I went up there to that room and knocked on the door. The door opened, and there was a fat lady standing there. And she had my wife's head on her shoulder. I said, hey, Kathleen, baby, what happened? She said, what you talking about, what happened, man? Just remember I told you I thought I was pregnant? I said, well, I don't know if you told me that. We was always talking. We was hoping we was pregnant, all this kind of stuff. She said, we sure enough pregnant now. I said, well, when is the baby going to be born? She said, next month. Next month? I said, no. When did I leave? Let's see, January, February, March. So that's why I know I was in Cuba for 8 months. No more. No less. Arrived in Algeria just in time to greet the birth of my son and my first child. My son was born in a hospital in Algeria. I was very curious about this. I wanted to go see. So I went down to the hospital when my wife went into labor, went down there. I want to watch the son being born. But the Algerians, they said, hey, man, we don't play that stuff over here. You get out of here. You can't come in here watching this. And you go home and we'll call you and tell you what it is. And so they don't just ask you to leave, they run you out. And so I went on back to my little room down there. Pretty soon the phone rang and there was a hospital to tell me, hey, your father, you have a son. I said, wow. So I told my friend, hey man, we got to go back out there, man. So we drove back out there, went in the room. There Kathleen was laying up there looking extremely relieved. And looked at this little baby, man. Looked at him. I'm telling you, his face was all, his face like a crumpled up little dish rag, man. I couldn't tell what he looked like, you know. And some of my friends, they went on and looked and said, hey man, he looks just like you, man. Well, this guy, he's 26 years old now. And he is me all over again. That's why I ain't got no problem. It didn't take 26 years either for me to figure that out, because very soon he started looking like me. And next year we had a daughter born in North Korea on the trip that we took there for that purpose, you know. And it was these children that began to strike spiritual sparks in my life. I give my children credit for bringing me to the Lord, because as a communist, I was traveling all over the communist world. I went to every communist country in the world except Albania. And I wasn't interested in going to Albania because Albania was ridiculous. It was the smallest communist country in the world, but it had the biggest mouth, boy. They had the most powerful radio Tirana in Albania. It was louder than the Voice of America, the BBC, Radio Moscow, Radio Peking. It was the loudest thing going. And it reminded me of that little old dog on the block, where everybody has one of these little dogs on the block that barks louder than the big dogs, you know. And you be trying to sneak home at night, and this little sucker snitches on you. So I wasn't interested in going to Albania. But I'm telling you, everywhere I went, every communist country I went to, I found that the government would tell you how wonderful they were and how great communism was. Then you get the chance to talk to the people, and they tell you how lousy the government was and how lousy communism was. And boy, it just starts your head to spinning, because in my heart, I wanted communism to be right. I wanted communism to work. And here I saw it wasn't right. It wasn't working. And so that was a serious challenge to me. And it makes me point out quickly that communism grabs you on three levels. It is the politics and the economics and the philosophy. And the politics and the economics went out the window quick with me, but it was the philosophy that had hold of me. And it was the philosophy that my children helped me to see through. Because as I looked at these children and saw a combination of my wife and myself in their faces, I began to be struck that, hey, this is a real serious process here. I don't see how this could be the result of no evolution, or how this could be the result of a big bang. Because this is what they were teaching in the schools in those days, that the universe, once upon a time, there was a big old glob of matter just swirling around in the empty void. And somehow this blob of matter collided with itself. A bolt of lightning jumped off of the blob of matter and went down and hit a rock. And a lizard crawled out from under the rock, and that's your grandfather. See? I'm sorry. I couldn't buy that no more, because I saw that this was something very specific. This was something organized. This was something programmed. You plant the seed, and 9 months later you get the crop. If it's an accident or a big bang, you plant the seed, you might get a crop tomorrow or 5 years from now. But why is it that every time the seed is planted, not just with me, but all over the planet Earth, 9 months later you got the crop? That seems like that's kind of organized and controlled to me. Then I started thinking about everything else that's organized and controlled. I started thinking about this Earth, how it swims around on its own axis every 24 hours, goes around the sun and the solar system every 365 days. Now that's not an accident. It was an accident. This sucker spin around about 15 times and was flowing out over it. That's an accident. Don't tell me something's going to do this so precise all down through history. And then you look over here, you got the swallows coming back to Capistrano. Every year, the same day, every year. How in the hell is that an accident? And then you got these salmon, they're born upstream up here. They go down and swim down, go out into the ocean. And then they go back and go right back to the same spot where they were spawned. How can that be an accident, man? Because you and I, we leave home, we lucky we can get back home, you know? And these fish go way out there to the ocean, they find their way right back. I began to think about that kind of stuff, and I began to say, there's something going on around here. I began to know that there was a creator. I didn't start wondering if there was a creator. I knew that there was a creator. And what I started thinking about is how am I going to straighten out my relation to this creator? Because I knew the gospel. I had learned the gospel. But I wasn't tripping about the gospel. But I sure started tripping about it then. And I started looking at my children. And my daughter inherited these ears. These ears run in my family. These are Cleavers. And they come up over and over again. And all my nieces, and these ears keep popping up. And my daughter, she got an overdose. Hers came straight out, you know. And I remember once we were talking to her because her ears coming out. And her name was Joju Yong-hee because she was given her name by the president's wife in North Korea. And her name means a beautiful female freedom fighter, born under the regime of Comrade Kim Il-sung. And her name is Joju Yong-hee. So they take one little syllable from each of those words and made Joju Yong-hee. And so she goes by the name of Joju. So one time I said, Joju, we're gonna make a move. We're gonna put you in the hospital. They're gonna operate on your ears and pin your ears down right. And then while you're in the hospital, we go file some papers and change your name. We're gonna name you after your wife, after my wife, after your mother. So you're gonna be Kathleen Jr. around here, you know. And she said, look, Daddy, just get on out of here talking about putting me in the hospital and cutting my ears down. She said, I can hear real good. And stuff you talk about, they put me in there and cut on my ears, I might not be able to hear nothing, so just leave me alone. You ain't gonna cut on my ears and you're not gonna change my name. My name is Joju. So her name is still Joju. But what happened was, her ears stopped growing. And her head kept growing. And pretty soon it balanced out. And she's a beautiful young lady. And I'm glad that we didn't cut on her ears, because her ears might have been pinned down too little. Then she'd have a great big head and little teeny ears, and then what could we do? You know? You have to give her an ear transplant, you know? So we got to be careful sometimes and let things go on and take their course, because sometimes people see little puppy dogs with big feet. They say, man, this dog is deformed. And so I said, well, maybe we ought to get this dog's feet operated on and chop them down a little bit. But then that dog keeps growing, and pretty soon that dog gets so big, you know he needs big feet. You see? So we make judgments prematurely sometimes. And so I am so glad that I went through what I went through. I'm so glad that I had the experience that brought me back to understanding that God was real. And it was in that situation that I began to get homesick. After Richard Nixon got arrested and busted, I started to hear it's time for me to go back home. You know? So we started getting all these black men elected to Congress, and they were getting elected to mayor and all this city councils and all this kind of stuff. So I knew a whole lot of them. So I started contacting, hey, you remember me? How about helping me come back home? See, I had jumped $50,000 bail when I left the country. And my organization paid it off, so the people who put up their house, well, nobody lost anything. And so I began to think I could come back home and get my bail reinstated, go to court and solve my legal problems, and be back home in America. But when I contacted these people, some of them didn't even answer me.